Hello everyone, it's Frank at Country Classics and Off-Road in Midlothian, Texas. Today we're working on a Ford F-150 four-wheel drive truck. As you can see, it's right here behind me. This truck, basically the owner has a complaint about some misfires. It's not running good and that sort of thing. It's kind of hoping that it would be something simple like spark plugs, maybe a plug wire, or even a coil pack. But upon doing a compression test, I have found that it's got a couple different problems that's not going to be real great. So what I wanted to show y'all is how I do a basic compression test and also what I'm looking for when I go a little further. This is a compression test set. As you can see, you have all the different hoses to fit different spark plug sizes. The actual compression tester I have over here. This is it right here. It's just a gauge, and as you can see, it actually has PSI written on it, so you know how many pounds of pressure you have. And just to kind of show you a little closer what these look like, it looks basically like a spark plug, and that's what goes in the spark plug hole. In the end of it is what I would call a Schrader valve. It's very similar, pretty much the same thing that you have in your tires. You can remove that center, and there is a time and place when we will remove the center. And what I want to do is I want to show you all when and why we would do that. So initially I did a compression test on cylinder number 1, and what I found was cylinder number 1 has 0 compression. So that's obviously really bad. The question is why? Is it a bad valve? Is it a bad cylinder? With some scoring, or possibly, you know, bad rings, broken rings, a hole in the piston. There's a lot of things that can cause that. So to be sure, I don't want to rely just on the compression test. So ultimately, I'm going to kind of tell you how to do a compression test, and then we'll move on to what I did next. So first, for the compression test, you screw this into the spark plug hole. It doesn't have to be tight, just as tight as you can get it, turning it by your hand on the rubber, and the rubber will give. So this will seat up against the spark plug hole, and then once you do that, you basically take what looks like a normal pneumatic tool connection, and you put this onto here. And when you get that done, then you can turn the engine over. Make sure that you have disconnected, of course, the coil pack or the main lead going to the coil, because what you don't want is you don't want the engine to fire up while you're doing a compression check. So with that said, that's what I did. I got 160 pounds on cylinder number 5, 0 on number 1. So I thought, while I'm on number 5, I'm going to do just a general valve test, because he seemed to think that it has bad valves. I don't disagree with him. It's got like 180,000 miles on it, so the probability of that is very, very high. So after doing the compression test, what I decided to do was pressure the cylinder up after getting the cylinder to top dead center and making sure it's on a compression stroke. What I want to show you is the first thing you do is you remove that Schrader valve in the end, because we're not going to be taking air in. Now we're going to be pushing air into the cylinder. So remove that Schrader valve right there in the end, and then there'll just be a hole. Once you get that done, you screw the hose down into the spark plug hole, and then you're going to pressure it up. There's a couple ways you can do that. The way I use always my air compressor. Now I have my air compressor set to 120 pounds. I really don't want to put 120 pounds into the cylinder. So what I have come up with is this little gadget right here. What this is, quite simply, is it's a regulator. It's got a gauge on it so I know how many pounds I'm putting in there. I'll put about 50 pounds into the cylinder, see what's going on. Now, with that said, I'll also put a filter on mine. The reason is, same reason, this is really for painting, and that's why I use it. It filters the air particles very thoroughly, and so you don't get particles in your paint. Well, I feel the same way about this cylinder. I don't want to put little pieces of metal or anything else that might be running through the pipes in my shop into the cylinder. It would absolutely be bad for it. So I already have one screwed in, and so what we're going to do is I'm just going to kind of show you how it works. So this right here, as you can see the head of it, I already have the hose screwed in. So I'm going to put this piece on there that I've come up with, and I'm going to hook my air hose to it. Now, as you can tell right here, you probably can't read it, got about 55 pounds going into it. You can hear air passing through the cylinder or passing through the valves or something. So the first thing we're going to look at while we're here over here, as you can't really see, try to give you a little better view, is where you put your oil in. So basically what we're able to do by removing the oil cap is we can see if air is passing into the crankcase. Now, I can tell you right here, I don't hear anything, I don't feel anything. That's good. That means the rings on this cylinder or on the piston, they're good. Piston's good, all that stuff is good. The reason that's important, and the reason I wanted to do it, is that cylinder has good compression. So we can clearly see there's no air coming out. That's a good thing. Now, we do hear air still coming out though, so we got to check a couple other things. So now we know the piston in general, the piston and the rings are good. We have compression. There's no air coming out of the crankcase after pressuring it up. Next, you move on to the air intake. There's a couple ways you can do that. On this one, I'm just coming over here and I'm looking and I'm listening. I don't hear any air coming out of here. So that tells me that the intake valve that goes, that the air comes from this filter down into the engine, the valve's got to be sealing well. Because if it wasn't, you would hear air coming out of here. So there's one more place that we can check, and that's going to be the exhaust valve. How we do that? We go to the exhaust. Unfortunately, on this truck, the exhaust is underneath it. It's a younger man who owns it, and he wanted, you know, the style of exhaust that dumps off underneath the bed. So I'm going to have to crawl underneath it and show y'all. Now, I don't know if y'all can hear it, but I certainly can. And there is a lot of air blowing out of here. Now, since the engine is on a compression stroke, this should not be happening. There should be no air coming out of the exhaust at all because that valve should be closed. What it tells me is that the valve seats, sorry, that's my compressor. So my compressor finally shut off. So what this is indicative of is a bad valve seat. It could be cracked, it could be worn. It has 180,000 miles on it, so I'm not surprised. But that tells us that even with good compression, we can have a bad valve. It probably would run fine, honestly, if it weren't for the other issue it has with cylinder number 1. But you would see slightly reduced power, of course. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to cylinder number 1, and I'm going to show you guys something that you don't ever want to see. Obviously, cylinder 1 has 0 compression, so you don't ever want to see that. But you never know. It could be a stuck valve, or it could be, you know, something on the top end, like a bad intake valve, bad exhaust valve. But I've already diagnosed it as a bad cylinder, and I'm going to show you how I know, or a bad rings, bad piston. I'm going to show you how I know. Okay, everyone, so here we are at the engine bay again, and what I want to show you is that cylinder number 1 that has 0 compression. I want to show you what it does when you pressure the cylinder up, because again, we're using that today to diagnose bad intake valve, bad exhaust valve, or maybe a dead cylinder, rings or something like that. So I went ahead and I put the, as you can see right here, sorry my camera's not the best in the world, but you can see right here, this is where my hose is coming out that we're going to hook up to. So we're going to go ahead and hook up our regulator to it, and then we're going to give it some air. Not much, 55 pounds, just like the rest of them. Now, what we're finding on this one is we can hear sounds, but the sound is coming from the crankcase. You can put your hand right here over the spout where you put your oil in, and you can kind of see it right there, I believe. There we go. And what I am finding is that there's air coming out of this. You should never ever get air out of this when you're pressuring up a cylinder, because no matter what, it doesn't even matter if it's top dead center, does not matter. You should not have air coming out of here. It's indicative of a piston with a hole in it, or bad rings, broken rings, a scored cylinder. There's many things that can cause it, but basically it's a dead cylinder. Ultimately, that's what the problem is, and that's not good. So just thought I would show you all that, because it does happen. I don't run across these that often, but they do happen.